All right. Hello, everyone. Sorry. I'll let
Oh,
you.
I need to make sure that everybody is okay with recording. If you're not, please let me know because then I'll stop it. I apologize. That's the second time I've done that in a row. Hopefully I'll get this by the end of the day. My name is Arianne. I am going to introduce you to your teacher for the Intro to Viking Garb today, Baronne Arianne de Châteaumichel. Hopefully I got that right. And I'm going to
Yes.
hand it over to you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. And thank everyone for being here. It makes it easier to do this. Um, I've since this is an introduction, I've put together a quick PowerPoint and then I'll show off some clothing. So let me bring that up. All right. So my contact information is on the front there. And I'm going to close that because that's a bit of a headache right now. Pardon me. All right, so we talk about the Vikings all the time, and a lot of us know that they didn't actually call themselves the Viking because Viking is a verb. But the people who went Viking during the Viking Age originally came from up here in the Scandinavia area. And there's Denmark. But they spread into Eastern Europe and Byzantium. They spread west into the British Isles and this northern coast, and they even went as far as the Iberian Peninsula and Italy, and probably got to Byzantium that way too. They also headed way west up to Iceland, Greenland, and it appears North America. And all that time, regional variations happened. So the question of what they wore is much more complex than we can get into in an introduction. But generally speaking, you have loose or pajama loose pants, sometimes really loose, especially among the Rus. You have layered tunics, probably mostly long sleeves from what we've seen, though a lot of people, especially in Trimaris, go with short sleeves on at least one layer. And you have hoods and other things intended to keep you warmer. You also have longer gowns. This is a layered look with a undergarment layer, a gown, a hangarok, which is what we also call the apron dress, which wasn't always worn, but it was a status symbol to wear it because it basically needed jewelry. And this lady here also has a long, warm coat on and headgear, because it doesn't matter how warm your body is if your head is cold. It also helps to keep your hair much cleaner if it's not exposed to your cooking fires and just everyday dirt. And they didn't exactly have knitting, but they had something called nail binding, which is a similar effect. And they used that especially for their socks, their mittens, and their caps, because you need to keep your head warm. So here we have basics about a man's outfit. And I brought you a video of a man getting dressed. We'll go with this way. Here he is in his underwear. He's about to put on his pants.
Pardon me, but I don't see the video.
Oh, great. Okay. I'll stop share on the PowerPoint and share directly with the video. Okay, and we'll restart that. Okay, so he's in his underwear. Those are linen. He's putting on his pants, which appeared to be wool. Notice there's a gusset right there in the middle, so he's got a little extra room. And they're not terribly fitted, although they're not as loose as some. Then that's his under tunic. And I love that clasp area because I would not want things getting through. Of course, there were regional differences all over the place because they traveled very far, and regional differences happen. But this is a good overview.
Arianne,
Yes.
have you seen documentation on that little flap that he has on his undertunic?
I have seen some. I couldn't give you a date on it.
Okay, I just kind of wondered because it's kind of strange.
Yeah. I vaguely recall it being Roos, but I'm not positive at the moment. Belts tended to be very narrow, whether they were leather or fabric. These socks are made with nail binding. And then these are Winnegus. I've seen different ways of wrapping them, but the same general effect applies. And I've seen these used on women's clothing as well, which completely makes sense when you consider how cold it was way up north. These are now bound mittens. And his cap is nail bound. Now, I half expected him to pick up this piece of fabric and put it on as a cloak, but he apparently decided he was warm enough. And we'll stop that one and go back to our PowerPoint. Okay. He also didn't wear any jewelry because he was portraying a common man instead of... Let me close that. Pardon me just a second. Give me a moment. All right, sorry about that. Here we have a woman's outfit. This is the underwear layer. This one I have edged it with a little bit of silk and the neckline and cuffs because that's the amount of silk that they would generally have access to in general for the whole area. Then we have the overgown. This one's wool. You could wear that by itself with a belt, maybe with an apron. But you could also add that extra layer for the hangarok and show off some beads. Also show off some brooches. Quite often the hangarok was also belted. There are signs of felting where a belt happened on at least one of the extant pieces that they've discovered. And I've put my hair up properly in this picture. So you can see it's covered, my head's warm, and it's slightly more decorative than wild hair all day. And in case that's not warm enough, you can have a shawl, which is actually pretty big at that time period. There's archaeological reason to believe that those might have been pinned in place with a brooch. And if it's really, really cold, you can wear your shawl and your coat. And then I've got some pictures of different ways that you can wear the Viking coat. Different lengths were appropriate for different reasons. This is a man in a short one. Mine is much longer because I like to keep my legs warm, and I think it looks better. Looks more like the Valkyrie brooches. You can wear it open. You can wear it kind of open and pinned low at about the waist. That one lets you show off your jewelry. And if it's cold out, you can wrap it tight and belt it. Like I said earlier, head coverings were vital. It kept your hair clean, it kept your head warm. Pretty much everybody seems to have worn a nail-bound cap, at least part of the time. Veils and scarves were also an option, although they don't seem very Viking age to me, so I tend to avoid them, unless you knot them in the back around your hair and probably cover them with something more decorative at that point. Here I'm wearing a Jorvik cap, although there's not much difference between that and a Dublin cap. And over here we have a lady wearing a Viking age hood, but she's got the hood part down. I have links to how you make those if you want. And because all that wool is maybe not the best idea for Florida, I have some examples of how you can be a little more Florida appropriate in your Viking. The easiest one, use fewer layers. You can replace a lot of your wool, especially the thicker wools, with either lightweight wools or lightweight linens. Instead of using wool for your nail-bound caps, you can use cotton yarn or maybe go out of period with bamboo yarn. That's supposed to be much cooler. Obviously, you don't need as many furs and linings, except maybe for Gulf Wars. And here I've got a good list of introductory sources for you. This one is not exactly introductory, but it's something you can work up to, and it'll be very helpful when you do. Okay. And I will look at the chat items now, if that sounds good to people. Looks like we have a couple questions. From what I've seen, the flap on the under tunic isn't a reference to the Viborg tunic. The examples I saw that had it, that I remember off at the moment, were Rus, but it completely makes sense for living up by the Arctic Circle. Okay, would one always wear nail-bound socks or hose separately, or could you wear hose in nail-bound socks? That's beyond the extent of my knowledge. I would assume, like most other things that we've seen about Viking Age clothing, there were variations depending on where and when you were. So if someone has a good idea, it tends to spread as people travel. Okay. I'm not sure about the background noises. As for the hood, it's beyond my specific knowledge. I know that it was one of the options listed on various sites. And I know that it completely makes sense. You're going to have access to the PowerPoint, so the sources will be available. And if you forget to get the PowerPoint, just email me later. I'll put my email address in here now while I'm thinking about it because it's in the PowerPoint. Okay. Have I found if there's a limit to the number of bead strings you can wear? That depends. Are we talking historically or reenactorisms? From what I've read, reenactors tend to wear a lot more strings than the average Viking Age person would actually have worn. But it is rather impressive when you see someone with strings and strings and strings. Ah, yes, thank you, Irina, for sharing the PowerPoint. Now, I'm going to show some clothing that I have, and then if we have any more questions, Irina can let me know, because I won't be looking at the chat right then. I have seen necklaces being discussed. I don't recall specific information about, oh, this was a necklace as opposed to something you swagged on your hangarock. Off the top of my head, I couldn't give you those sites. But if you email me later, I will dig them out. So first off, I have another example of the undergown. A lot of variation in people's theories about how it was cut. Basically, there weren't a whole lot of them that stuck around, but it's very simply done. If we were having Scandinavian type weather today, I would need at least one additional layer. This is the gown that would be worn by itself or in between the undergown and the hangarock. Different options on neckline, different options on the cut and things. And here's a very similar man's tunic. It's shorter, comes to about knee length. And he wanted short sleeves, so it's definitely worn over something unless it's completely Florida weather. Got a glare. Don't know if that's better or worse. Okay, I'm going to put on the light again. Okay, so this is the purple wool long sleeves, because if I'm wearing wool, it's because I'm cold. Here we have another example of a hangarock. This one has tablet weaving across the top there, just to be a bit more decorative. And a lot of very decorative embroidery in the seams, which if you saw decoration, that's where it was. This is the wool scarf that I have. And the neat thing about it is because it's so big and so warm, a man can wear it, or a woman, I suppose, like this. Or the woman can wear it wrapped the way I had it the other day. Brooch right there, keep the shoulders nice and warm. Can wrap it like this. And if you want to have it around, but you don't necessarily need to be wearing it, you can do something like that. And then we have my Viking coat, which is all rectangular construction. The pieces of fabric that are cut from the wrist end of the sleeves got added down here at the body end of the sleeves to make them a little more full. I can have it wide open because I'm just being decorative with it. Kind of closed with the brooch, or really closed because it's cold out and I'm going to belt it in place. However, it's July. I also have a pair of men's breeches that I'm currently working on. If anyone's interested in how they're constructed. Basically, there's a big gusset or a pieced gusset or something in between there so that you've got enough room so that you don't split out. And depending on where and when you are, the pants can be almost fitted or very, very loose. These are about as full as pajama pants, maybe a little more full. I think that's everything. I missed the hats with brims question. Have I seen any hats with brims? I have not personally, aside from like the roost style ones where you can fold back the fur, and that's not really a brim, that doesn't go out. So I'm not sure it would make sense, but it's not something that's coming to mind immediately. I answered that one. How do I finish the ends of my tablet woven belts? Give me a moment, I'll get it. Okay, so this is the tablet woven belt that I showed you. And when it got too short to weave, I separated the strands into groups of 4, one for each of the cards, and I did a 4-strand braid for each of them, and then tied it off with a knot, and this bottom part is just the loose threads. I'm sure there are other ways to finish it off, that's just the way I did it. Thank you. And do we have any other questions? It looks like we've got about 15 minutes. I do have a pair of Winnegus that I can show people. If you were in the preceding class, you heard about how the whip-stitched edge was very, very widely used. Since I'm making the Winnegus out of yardage instead of something woven by hand to be specifically this wide, I'm doing the whip stitch along the cut edge. And this one is finished. I've got a hook from one of my favorite online merchants attached at the end. And that's what you use if you're being dressier than the gentleman in the picture. That's what you use to keep things closed so that your Winnegus stay in place. We've got about 12 more minutes. Does anyone else have another question or want to see something again? Oh, I can show up. Yes, they are pretty much the same thing as leg wraps for a horse, and pretty much for the same reason. Because your legs are an extremity, they tend to get cold more easily than anything else, and you really don't want that. So you put on a few extra layers around your feet and your lower legs, and you protect them. And I can show you some jewelry. You know, now that I think about it, I know people who've used horse legs wraps too, especially for fighting in, because they don't want to take something that somebody worked really hard to make and destroy them on the fighting field. So when I'm sitting down, okay, the positioning of the brooches. From what we've been able to tell about the construction of the hangarock, the hangarock generally had 2 short loops on the front and 2 long loops on the back. And the loops from the back will be brought over the shoulder and attached with a brooch to the loops on the front. So brooch pin just goes through there. And there are different ways to attach. Easier. There are different ways to attach the beads, but I just put the hook around that short loop before I put the pin from the brooch through the short loop, and they stay pretty securely. In the graves, they've discovered pins that were placed where they think they were pinning the undergown closed, sometimes up high by the neck, and sometimes a little lower, like maybe the gown is being worn by itself, and this is where you don't want it to open up. But they've also considered, hey, maybe the brooch shifted while it was while the body was going through what it went through, and it isn't in its original place anymore. They were both functional and decorative, so best of both worlds. You have a really good excuse to wear them. Like, this is the brooch. There. This is the brooch that I used to pin the shawl closed and later used on the coat when I had it in that mostly open position. This is another similar style of brooch to these. And these are two different types of hooks for the winnigus. You know, the leg wraps, although there's a theory that the hooks were also used on fabric belts to lock them in place. So maybe, maybe not. It's one of those things where if there are two of them found in the grave and they're down by the legs, chances are they were on winnigus. If there's one and it's up around the belly, then chances are it was on a belt. Other than that, who knows? And any other questions? Actually, I can show you what a Dublin, or not a Dublin cap. This is a Jorvik cap. And it's just a very simple rectangle of fabric, big enough to cover your head or most of it. Seam up the back, and obviously finish your edges, because especially when things were woven by hand, you wouldn't want it getting destroyed by being worn. And ties on it. The difference between this and the Dublin cap is so minimal. Basically, the Dublin cap just has more rounding in the back, a little bit of shaping. And it serves to be an extra layer. Serves as an extra layer to keep your head warm. And it's maybe a little bit more decorative than a nail-bound cap. Personally, I like the point because if I put my hair in a high bun, it looks more elven. I don't do angry now. And do we have any more discussion or anything? Because I think I've run out of things to talk about.
All right. Oh, you got another one.
Okay. Do I fold hems up twice or just once on the wool garments? Well, from the archaeological evidence, it looks like wool garments, when they weren't whip stitched, because that's basically folding it twice and completely and surrounding it. Whether wool garments were folded up once or twice depended on whether they were fulled in any way, because if the fabric is fulled, then those fibers are locked together and they're not going to come unwoven. But if the fabric is not fulled, then you have an edge that can unravel and you want to fold it twice. So clearly, it's one of those things where whether you fold it once or twice depends on whether you're going to be regretting not folding it twice. Okay, and you're welcome. And trim only on the front edges. From what I've read, the front, the visible parts tended to be more visible and therefore more decorated. Which is why you see a lot of people with a bit of with a bit of tablet woven trim right across the center front right there. It's one of those things where we're working off just fragments found in graves, usually fragments found in graves because they're stuck to the inside of some brooch somewhere. So there's a lot we don't know, but it appears that yes, trim when it happened was only on the front. And we have 2 more minutes. Does anyone have anything else before I release you?
All right, I'm going to stop the recording. I want to thank you,
You're welcome.
Arianne, for your time today.